Hello and welcome to the Cole Memo. Today we're going to be talking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We might even be talking about the early days of the Illinois medical cannabis program, what it's like to comply with the Cole Memo, and that's not a reference to this show name. It's actually well, we'll dig into that later. But you are listening, folks, to the Cole Memo. I'm your host, Cole Preston. Every episode is released in audio, video, and transcript format. To find the transcript, audio, or video version of any episode, just refer to the description of the episode that you're listening to now. Within that description, you can find a link that will take you to our website, which will display the transcript for this episode and the platforms where you can find this episode in audio and video formats. If you're unable to locate the episode description on whichever platform you're listening from, simply take note of the episode number and visit thecolememo.com. From there, you can use the search functionality to find the corresponding episode, and then you'll be able to access the audio, video, and transcript version of the episode. You might also find any links that we reference during today's episode so that you might be able to do your own research or purchase awesome products from Oh Yes. If
Nice.
If you're not listening to this episode of the Cole Memo on Patreon, then you're listening to this episode later than our patrons. To become a patron, go to thecolememo.com/Patreon. It's a great way to support our show. It only costs $3 a month and it gives you access to our episodes as they release. Another way to support our show is at thecolememo.com/support. You can make a one-time monthly or yearly contribution of your choice. If you're not able to support us financially, though, that's all right. One of the best ways to support our show is free. Subscribe to or follow the show. Leave us a positive review from wherever you're listening to us from. Favorite this episode, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, or send it to your best friend. Your engagement and support is appreciated. Today is April 3rd, 2024. I'm sparking up a joint with Tanya Griffin. How's it going, Tanya?
It's going well. It's going well. I don't have a joint to spark up, so I'm missing out, but
Well, you're joining me in
I'm gonna
spirit,
roll with
right?
you. I'm joining you in spirit. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't joking for folks that are tuning in. We will be talking about sex, and maybe maybe they realize by looking around in your room right now that it wasn't a
This is my
joke.
office. We're gonna be talking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, baby. All
Yes.
day long.
So,
Yeah.
please tell us who you are and where we can find you online, all that good stuff.
All right, sure. My name is Tanya Griffin. I know a lot of your listeners come from Illinois, and so do I. So I kind of got into the cannabis business in the first round of medical licenses. I had some dispensaries that I sold to an MSO, and I'm back in the dispensary business with our dispensary Snap Canna in Pontiac and Elk Grove Village. But I'm here talking to you today really about my ecstatic sex brand. Oh, yes. So double O orgasm, YES. Oh, thanks, Cole. And I also think I would love to talk to you about my nonprofit, Save My Life, which definitely ties into this whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll vibe in the sense that I have, created these vending cabinets, distribution cabinets, and can provide free Narcan, which brings you back to life if you're at risk of an overdose in any dispensary you go to, bar, restaurant, anywhere people work, live, and play in Illinois. So hopefully we get to dance around both of those subjects today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm noting that right now so that I don't
Yeah.
forget, because it's a very
Mostly
important.
sex and drugs, though, Cole.
Yeah.
Let's stick
Yeah.
to the point. Yeah.
For sure. Well, yeah, I just displayed for our listeners your line of products. Do you want to tell us? It's a pretty unique line of
Yeah.
products. So I'll give you
Yeah,
the floor.
sure. Oh yes. My big good news for your Illinois listeners and anybody who's going to make their way to Chicago is that um, I have partnered with Nature's Grace and Wellness, and we will have three of our 10 products with THC on dispensary shelves by 420. So the products that are coming to Illinois that are going to give you that real canagasm, jacked up with THC is Roll Baby Roll. So that's our oral sex elixir, coconut oil base, really, just leaning into that retro vibe. It's sublingual but that doesn't mean it just goes on your mouth. And then we have Roll Baby Roll, which on this little guy, I made it with a roller ball, which goes very, very nice on the clitoris. And Start Me Up, this one, this guy is our water-based lickable glide. So those are the products that are going to be on dispensary shelves in Illinois, coming up very soon. But if you go to ooyes.love, I have all of these products, including Groove Grease, our candle, Love Me Too, of course, a nod to the Beatles, which is our salve. My best product, Unplugged, which doesn't have any cannabinoids, but is a premium silicone lube. And that's one, Cole, you just should not do without. Oh, Wet. Wet is awesome. Those are my medicated dry mouth lozenges. So I medicated those with sorbitol. So they don't have any cannabinoids in them. But if you, smoking that joint, you may end up with some cotton mouth. So either cotton mouth or oral sex, both of those deserve Wet. Be Wild that you see there, that is our Be Wild Tantric Honey, and Cole, that is coming to Illinois. So we're going to bring Be Wild, where we, not only feed the bees hemp, but THC, and you get this single ingredient raw honey that's, infused with aphrodisiac herbs, Maria Puma and Kachuba, THC, hemp, and you get this raw honey that gets you high. The one on the website does not get you as high, but it's just an incredible story where the bees have eaten this nectar rich in RSO, and we can get you, it's almost equivalent to, well, it is equivalent to nanoemulsification in the sense that in terms of bioavailability, this raw honey is fast acting and about 9 to 10 times more bioavailable than a traditional tincture. So that's kind
Wow.
of cool.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So, to put a finer point on some of this, because some people might be like wondering, like, cannabis sex, like, of course, maybe that's not new to people. Like, maybe they've gotten high and had sex before. And, as I think you pointed out in one of our private conversations before we got on air, like, that's something that's been happening historically for as long
Well,
as
yeah,
mankind,
and I
right?
do want to bring that up. I did not invent, sex and drugs. They have gone together magically, sex and cannabis, since the Egyptians, fast forward to the Indian culture with bang. It wasn't really until the 1930s when we started really demonizing cannabis and prohibiting and criminalizing cannabis. Uh, that we started really separating sex from cannabis. It was always in the pharmacological journals. We always connected the two. And then when we started prohibiting and demonizing it, we were very concerned. It was all about lock up your white women. They're going to turn into sexual freaks if you give them cannabis. I personally think that's a good thing. So I have leaned into that concept and can tell you from experience, cannabis and sex go extremely well together.
Yeah. Yeah. Touche. Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I guess like I said, some people may not understand the absorption that not only,
Yes,
yeah, can you talk about
that's
that?
true. Yeah, absolutely. So, um, relative to cannabis, Cole is partaking in a joint or flower. We have cartridges. These ways of getting cannabis into your bloodstream, activate very quickly. This gives you that high feeling right away. On the other hand, if you are taking a gummy, for example, that's got to go through your digestive system, and the uptake takes a little longer. All of my products are, if you go into a dispensary, for example, and you're looking at the online ordering, you're going to find them in the edible section. So mine are sublingual edible products designed to be eaten off your body parts, quite frankly. And because they are sublingual and hit the mucous membranes, whichever ones we're talking about, it does get you high a little quicker, which is absolutely lovely. And one of the things you and I had discussed, which is not something everyone knows, but I always like to remind people about, is um, THC, cannabis, doesn't always act alone. It needs your body's um, help in metabolizing the THC. And as a female, um, estrogen is an absolute integral part of metabolizing THC, and women um, fluctuate in their estrogen levels at all kinds of times. You know, during the month, we cycle in and out of estrogen. If you're perimenopausal or postmenopausal, you may have wiped out your estrogen altogether and are using, a topical or stagnant to increase that estrogen. But what estrogen is doing, whether you're talking about cannabis and and estrogen's help in jumping in and reaching, grabbing THC from the CB1 receptors and pushing it through the endocannabinoid system, or even psychedelics. You know, psychedelics, of course, you're hitting neurotransmitters, but estrogen is integral in that relationship too. So one of the things that's very, very important to me, and that I've been working on, to me, this brand, Oh Yes, was absolutely about building and creating mindful, naturally natural botanical products. That was very, very important to me because I use them myself. But really, the core of this brand, the reason why I built it, was to help people have more and better sex. Full stop. I built a sex quiz where you get to say, it's all online. You go on your phone. You can say, oh yes, oh no, oh maybe so, to 100 different sex acts. You share it with your partner, and I only share what you're willing to do together. And the purpose of there you go. The purpose, it's very discreet, all the security measures are in, but the purpose of that was to get the conversation going and destigmatize the conversations around sex, and of course, by extension, drugs tied to that. And the reason why I kind of got lost in the estrogen conversation is one of the other pieces of the brand that's important to me is really helping women also understand that their cannabis use and their cannabis dosing can fluctuate during even the month, and that when you use cannabis in the bedroom with sex, there are ways to do it to make it work exceptionally well. And not that the goal is always an orgasm, but why not? Why not have that orgasm?
Yeah. Well, and I
Yeah.
mean, I just read that I think Illinois News Joint reported this, and a few other outlets reported that. Sorry, I'm
Yeah, I'm going to
looking
help
for
you
the
with this.
article.
She's a friend of mine, Suzanne Melville, and she's been doing work. She actually lives in Italy, but she came back here to Illinois to help get orgasm, basically female orgasm disorder. I'm going to simplify it
Oh,
in
hey,
layman's
yeah,
term on into, one of the, things that we treat with medical cannabis, which, thank you for that, because the real and the reason why it did that is she did a huge survey of women and has been working on this with her postdoc and her oh, there you go, in her center for some time. So what we understand is that yes, cannabis is instrumental in helping with female orgasmic disorder. If you don't have that disorder, it's also quite good.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, Suzanne's done great work. I've we use the sex quiz a little bit to kind of help with that as well. But it's back to that same notion that when you start marrying sex and cannabis like we used to for thousands of years, um, that's a very happy place you can
yeah,
be. And I keep it. The other thing that was important to me, Cole, is keeping the price point low. So these are we keep it under $30 for that Canagasm. That was super important to me, so that you can just try it. I to me, arousal, sex is not as much about whether cannabis works for sex or this works for sex. It's about it's a mind thing. Your biggest sex organ is absolutely your mind. So if you can get in the game and you can feel aroused, that's what's helping with blood flow. Now, yes, CBD happens to be a very, very effective vasodilator. Vasodilator is something that helps increase blood flow. Other things that increase blood flow is estrogen, Viagra, Cialis. These are all things that increase blood flow. But the other thing that increases blood flow is arousal. So for me, the Oh Yes brand and tying it to that, sex, drugs, and rock and roll vibe, every one of my products are tied to some album, Start Me Up, of course, the Rolling Stones, Roll Baby Roll the Doors, all of my products are trying to take you back to that 1960s, 70s um, period when sexual liberation and the pill came out. I mean, we were enjoying sex back then, and we certainly approached it with a little less, unfortunately, puritanism. Wow, that's a big one. Than we are now. And I want to swing it back to free sex and love, baby.
Hell yeah. Yeah, no, and I think it's good that I didn't even think about this until you were talking about what your product will be sold as an edible, like under the edible menu.
Yes, yeah,
Um, Infused products in Illinois are actually taxed at a higher rate, unfortunately, and so it's good probably that you're keeping that price on the lower
yeah,
end of things. And when you really put it that way, it's funny. I've never really had a solid point here until we've got your product. And I promise I'm not just giving you free advertising here. I'm just saying that. So the point I've made and why I think it's backwards that we tax infused products more than we tax other products is because you could argue that infused products are maybe the healthiest products you can consume. And
right.
look, people will actually get pretty upset with me when I talk about this, and some may even call me a hypocrite because I'm sitting here smoking a joint. But I want to acknowledge right now that this joint that I'm smoking, there are probably healthier ways to consume cannabis.
Well,
I'm not,
absolutely.
and so like in Illinois, there there's this idea in other states, like this idea of a soda tax where we tax drinks
Yeah,
or things with a lot of sugar in them.
the sugar tax, basically. Yeah,
Bingo,
yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah.
to dissuade people from engaging in these more harmful activities. But here in cannabis, it's weird. It's like the
Right,
more healthy products are taxed at a higher rate, and it's like, again,
right. That doesn't
I want to be
seem
very
right.
clear. I'm not saying that we should raise taxes on flour. I'm not saying that. I'm just
Well,
saying that.
obviously, Cole, we got to go the opposite direction. What we're
Right.
doing from a taxing standpoint is driving so much business into the legacy market, um, which makes absolute sense. We certainly have made some huge missteps since the inception of legalization about taxation and how we're managing compliance regulation. That is the world I come from. My core company is Water and Trees, and that company is really a marketing growth management agency. But what we, you know, dancing around, whether it's healthcare or even certainly at a more extreme, the cannabis industry, navigating the regulatory process and then by extension, 280E is so crippling that companies like mine, it's very hard to do it. I own my company 100%. I am self-funded. This has been a process. And starting a CPG brand in any sense, like you mentioned, a beverage, is very difficult. When you layer whole cannabis on top of that, it's you got to have a very strong stomach and arguably pretty deep pockets to navigate this space. It's amazing. Many of us are still solvent, to be honest, because
Yeah.
it's tricky business, as you know from your other guests.
Yeah, and I want to get more into that on the later half of the show, but I wanted to give you more space on your Oh Yes products, and then I also wanted to talk about the Narcan project.
Yeah.
Anything else that you wanted to talk about with regard to the Oh Yes products? I mean, you said they're coming to
Um,
Illinois soon, right? So
I'm super excited about that. And again, that partnership is with Nature's Grace. I don't know if anyone knows, many of us here in the industry in Illinois know Nature's Grace, but Larry and Kelly and Tim and Claire and Patrick and the guys, I mean, it's a family owned business. They've been doing this for a long time. It's woman owned. And those things were super important to me. Keeping price point where it was affordable for people to come in and try this ecstatic sex experience was super important to me. And so I'm just really excited to get it out in Illinois. Now that all being said, if your listeners are outside of Illinois or aren't planning a trip to Chicago in the near future, we've put a lot of I have put a lot of attention into mindfully creating products that are very rich in the minor cannabinoids, which also go a long way for sex. Like again, I mentioned CBD as a vasodilator. I used CBG in my products, which the the true studies and resources are should still be forthcoming, but we do understand that CBG does help with mood and anxiety, and those are the things relative to sex that are important. Having said all that, the most important thing about sex is what I said initially: show up, stay present, and learn to communicate your needs. That's what's going to get you to that you know place where you're heading. Hopefully a big O, my friend.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
folks, if you want to check it out, I've got the link to the store in the
Wow,
podcast
that's very
description,
kind.
and you can check it out. It looks like they've got free shipping for orders over $69.
Well, and I'll
So,
tell you about that. Yeah, that's just how do you not jump into the $69 thing? But we do these Sexperience O boxes where you basically get a selection of four different products for $69. And that's just fun.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so that's going to be a good weekend
that's awesome.
for sure. Yeah.
Um, so your other project, and I'm just displaying those boxes before we segue.
Oh, yes, those are
Yeah.
our O boxes.
Your other
Nice.
project that I found very interesting was the Narcan project. We
Yes,
actually, just stocked up on Narcan recently. Not that I ever plan to need it, but that's exactly
right?
the point.
That is the point. That is the point.
So
Yeah, Save My Life, savemylife.org is a project I have been working on, you know, since the early days of cannabis, since 2014. Dr. Kathleen Burke is on my board. She leads up the Will County harm reduction projects over there. And what we set out to do, and we've now done it successfully, is I designed these distribution cabinets, small, discreet. They can go indoors, they can go in the reception or in the bathrooms of a dispensary or a bar or a hotel, anywhere in Illinois where people work, live, and play. And yes, and we supply those cabinets with an unlimited supply of naloxone. Now, naloxone is just the name of a Narcan nasal spray. So you're getting two nasal sprays, absolutely no questions asked. You don't have to give me your name, anything. Um, and the objective is to get these into everyone's hands. Now, to your point, Cole, that does not mean that you're using drugs necessarily, but you can save someone else's life if Narcan is accessible if someone is overdosing. And what we need to keep in mind is, because we are in the drug business, cannabis can be considered a drug. We like to call it medicine and everything else, but it falls in that category. When you're buying cannabis from a dispensary, arguably you are not at risk of an overdose, because it's lab tested. The joint you are smoking, the edibles you buy at a dispensary, those are going to be safe. But if you go to a bachelor party and somebody, it's showing up in everything else. So if you're buying legacy gummies, absolutely that can have fentanyl in it. If you think you're taking a Xanax, a pressed pill, that absolutely could easily have a lethal dose of fentanyl in it. And if you're following, what's going on in harm reduction right now in the U.S., in the world, Cole, it is so absolutely devastating. And if in your mind you are picturing a junkie overdosing, you are getting it absolutely all wrong. You need to really picture a young high school kid overdosing, because that is where it's rampaging through our suburbs. So my big shout out, other than of course go have a lot of sex this week, my big shout out to the other dispensary owners is um, this will not cost you anything. I mean, if you're willing to donate the cost of the cabinet, thank you. But otherwise, please put a distribution cabinet up, provide access to free Narcan to anybody who wants it. Your customers and your bud tenders and your entire team are going to thank you, because everywhere we have it right now, that is my experience. And I think it's important, in my opinion, for the cannabis industry to, get behind this and support protecting each other from any
Yeah.
kind of drug use,
And I just want
including
to,
prescription pharmaceutical, my friend. That's included in this mess.
well said. And I just
Yeah.
want to, I'm not asking you to name any names or anything else, but I do kind of want to issue a challenge. I was told by you that you kind of proposed this to people and that they were kind of obstinate to the idea. So I'm not asking you to
Right.
name names,
I don't want to name names, but what,
but
what I want to do is thank you for bringing that up. All of you who own dispensaries in the industry, please, please keep this in mind. By providing Narcan, you are not communicating to your customers in your community that cannabis is a lethal drug or that they are at risk of overdosing. I think your communities are more educated. And furthermore, it is our obligation, and we should um, really be out there to protect people. We do a red newspaper stand that holds 150 Narcan boxes. And, the dispensaries, if you know your community, if you know the city, you can donate these to the high school. You can donate one to the library, to the city hall. Because again, keep in mind, while our cannabis is safe, it is lab tested, we still want to protect everyone, and making sure Narcan is everywhere is the right thing to do. So please, please call me on this. Jump on savemylife.org. Hit me up through LinkedIn. We are eager to get you a cabinet and get everyone in Illinois access.
yeah, and that link will also be in the podcast description, folks. So just check
Thank
that
you.
out if that makes it easier for you. And I just want to say, like, if you're not aware of the idea of harm reduction, I would recommend you check out. There's a YouTube channel called Channel 5 with Andrew Callahan, and he visited a harm reduction facility. And he even included the perspective of somebody who is generally opposed to harm reduction. And I think it's important to hear, since we just brought up this subject, let's just play a small snippet. I want to
Oh yeah.
reiterate, this person is against harm reduction, but it's interesting what they have to say about Narcan. Um,
It's because they love, right? They're learning to love themselves. They're learning to love their families again. They're learning to love their community, right? Those people give back.
Now, that being said, Richie isn't completely against all harm reduction services.
The only harm reduction that should be going on is Narcan. I have no problem with that. You want to go around
Yes.
and give out Narcan to individuals so they don't OD on their own accord? That's fine. You need Narcan.
so
Yes. Thank you.
against harm reduction, he will say, and I think we would probably disagree with this person on most subjects given that, but he agrees that you can at least save somebody's life, because if
Yes.
somebody's on the ground dying, that's not the time to say, well, you can either make the decision to save their life if you have Narcan, you know, that's really what it comes down to,
It is. It is literally the difference between life or death. And and portraying, I mean, every life we need to care deeply about. But just think, these are your kids, right? So this is not just somebody, homeless person living on the street, which we should love and protect. But these are our kids that are dying, our 14-year-olds. And I'm in this space, so I've touched so many of these crises. And Cole, it would absolutely break your heart, and we have to solve the problem. We're killing each other wholesale with fentanyl, and there's a way to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just once again, folks, we've mentioned at least 3 links right now. I just mentioned a YouTube video, so those are all in the
Yeah.
podcast description. And I just thought maybe to segue, I could play just a small joke before we get into business talk. Does that sound good?
I always
Just
like a good
because
joke.
it's a joke that actually has a little bit of like actual science behind it. And it's, I know I'm going to play this and people will say this isn't maybe by the best comedian, but I think this is a really good joke.
Let's see
So
what you got.
let's watch it. Yeah.
See, the thing about edibles, one of the problems with it being
Funny.
illegal is that a lot of us don't have a lot of information that we could use. Like, there's a difference between smoking it and eating it. When you smoke it, you get THC, but when you eat it, it's processed by your liver, and it produces something called 11-hydroxymetabolite. That's 5 times more psychoactive than THC, and it lets you talk to dolphins.
All right.
Yeah. There's the
Thought you could talk to dolphins anyway.
right. Right. So I wanted to return to a point that you mentioned earlier. And I'm sure we can spider web in many different ways. But I never thought about it. I think it was because I was smoking a joint when you said it, but I never really had thought about this until now. Like I had a light bulb go off. You were talking about, and I've heard this from many other people than you, like the idea of legalization is to replace, the legacy market with a market that's, tested, legal, taxed, all of those things. And it was interesting. I just recalled a conversation that I had with a University of Illinois professor that he collects data for the state of Illinois for like diversity and inclusion data. But we were talking just about kind of that subject, the idea of replacing the legacy market. And one thing that he said to me that I never really thought about until you were just saying that is he said, Cole, there's still a black market for milk or a legacy market for
Right.
milk.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that. And I say that because think about when like a flood or bad weather's coming in, you go and you get milk and eggs and bread. I'm just being cliche, but seriously,
You're
that's part of the
right.
cliche, right?
Yes.
So when you think about the fact that there still is a legacy market for things like eggs and milk and, even meat, for example,
Right.
um,
Right.
I'm curious just like, if this exercise is like, if we're not acknowledging that, I'm not saying we can't get to where we are with meat and eggs, which is where most people just go to the store and buy it, right?
Right.
Which that's the
Right.
goal, right? I'm not saying we can't get there, but I think it's weird that we're also not acknowledging that other truth that it's always
Well,
going to exist, you know?
I don't know that I was ever in the camp of not acknowledging the legacy market. I agree with you. I think they
Yeah,
do
yeah,
run parallel. I think that my instinct is the mother of 6 kids is we want our loved ones and everyone around us protected. So the advantage of pasteurized milk, eggs, those things is that we have a layer of regulation that protects us um, in the communities where we live, and that is the advantage. Eliminating the legacy market completely, it's not even a hope of mine. I mean, I don't think that's
yeah,
what we are going for, but we also don't want to create such a vast gulf between, buying a product from the guy who brings a bunch of weed to your house, the legacy market, untaxed, and the obligations we as dispensary owners have, not only from a regulatory standpoint, currently until cannabis is rescheduled, fingers crossed, all of our net profits, that 25%, that if you're running a clean, smart operation, you are sending that to the federal government. So that makes your business untenable, which is why we're seeing such incredible stress in the cannabis market over the last 2 to 3 years, just sort of bubbled up to the surface. Now, I would argue that we're going to see some positive movements when we get rescheduled. We will see the next bubble, just like Silicon Valley had a secondary, really, vibrant bubble. When we see institutional investing coming in, when we see banking being able to be coming in a way that is not so heavily taxed, when we see some of this just cannabis tax tied to everything we do, real estate, everything we buy, everything we do has that tax on it above and beyond what we get hit with 280E. When those things start to normalize, we're going to see more of a balance, I would believe, between the legacy and the regulated market, akin to the grocery store,
Yeah.
as you mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to think about. And I think part of what you're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, with the rescheduling, and you kind of mentioned it at the beginning of the show, is the idea that, some of these operations, I think the word you said, I think you said insolvent or something like that. I don't know. That's a
Or
big word.
well, let's say that they're no longer solvent. That you're basically, you have way more money going out than you do coming in, and that comes when everything you do, when you are told you need, more staff than you would normally do in a traditional business. So your labor costs are higher, your real estate costs are higher. You're in a regulatory atmosphere where the hoops that you have to jump from, not only from a security standpoint, obviously, but just from a paperwork standpoint to the IDFPR, are so rigorous that it's very hard to balance profits at the end of the day. And over time, that is unsustainable, and we are watching cannabis companies go out of business left and right now. And that's the reason for it. It's not always because you have operators that can't get a good handle. It's that you're dealing in an industry that is very, very difficult to manage and operate within.
Well, to your point, this is my old show was called the Chillinois Podcast. Let me see if I still have
right.
a logo for that. But doesn't look like I do.
Yeah.
But on that show, to your point, Mike Fouché from a website called Grown In came
Yep.
on and
Mike.
was, Mike.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
He was on my show talking about, and I've actually got this. You made me think of it. I'll
Yeah.
make this a little bit bigger. On July 4th, he came on and he was saying that state data showed at the time that 77% of the cannabis cultivation market was controlled by 6 companies. But he
Right.
pondered whether or not these operations are actually profitable. He mentioned that many people in finance question whether or not the cannabis industry is profitable in the short term or the long term. He goes on to say that he hears that most
Right.
people running cannabis companies are running them with the expectation that they'll make their money when they sell their operation.
Right, the big exit. And that whole, because I've spent the last, now I think 13 years in the cannabis industry, which is a long, long time. I really got in around 2011. And the ride I've been on is very, like, I myself had a very good exit in the cannabis industry. The exit I had, I would not have again in this current bubble. Like, those things are not happening anymore. And back in the day, it was 30, 40 times EBITDA. You were throwing, just vomiting some ideas on a piece of paper and you were getting funded. That is no longer the case. And the awakening that the industry had to go through, coming out of COVID, right, in that move, VCs, angels, investors, I don't think any of us are romanticizing the cannabis industry any longer. This is a tough business. The fact that I have, recently launched an ecstatic sex brand into the industry, questions my sense, what the heck I'm doing. But also when you're inside this bubble, Cole, it's so exciting, and you're pushing through, trailblazing literally such new territory that it is very, very hard to walk away when you're in it. I made the decision to sort of navigate the path of sexual wellness and cannabis for a very specific reason. If I had to put my eggs in a particular basket, it's always sex. Cannabis is a backstop to sexual wellness, which has a lot more growth potential, in the sense that, like, I don't know if you've read the latest McKinsey report that just came out, but the wellness industry, which cannabis can kind of carve a little piece out of, globally is a $1.8 trillion industry. The top 2 growth markets in that industry are sexual wellness and, menopause. We find cycles, women's cycles. We really have taken a liking to that. If you then toggle that over to cannabis and what that does for sex, and then throw a little tourism in there, to me, that's the magic sort of trifecta of how we can reach men and women in this space. Anyway, those are my
Yeah.
those are my thoughts.
I think
And
this is
listen,
what
Cole, I'm not even smoking. If you gave me a joint, you'd never get me to stop talking.
Hey, but that's seriously, it's welcome.
Oh
That's what
yeah,
this
great article by the way, and very interesting to kind of dig into those trends because it certainly affects cannabis, whether that's the minor cannabinoids, CBD, CBG, CBN, or we're looking at a decriminalized or progressively legalized cannabis industry that includes THC. Like if we go to Schedule 3, we're going to see a huge movement. My goodness, if we fully legalize and pull cannabis off the schedule, it's going to be very interesting to watch how that connects with not only sex, obviously, that's a small piece of wellness, but how it really explodes into the wellness industry
yeah.
far more than it has, thus far.
Yeah. What was it like? You said you got in the industry in 2011?
Well, I say 11 because I was dancing around in 11, but I was back in 2012, 13, I was building surgical centers. And I because with my company, Water and Trees, I was deeply involved in the healthcare industry. And I was sitting in a surgical center in Pilsen, Illinois, that we were building. And I read this article that medical cannabis is coming to Illinois. And it literally blew my mind. And I at the time I was married to a blues musician, was token up with the volcano in the basement. So even though I was raising 4 kids and really didn't have a good grasp of any kind of drug use at the time, it definitely made a lot of sense to me. And because I come from Irish stock, alcoholism has just rampaged through my family. It has blown it up in every little pocket, parent, everywhere I look, alcohol has been extremely destructive. So when I looked at cannabis, to me, not having the hangovers, not making you mean and ugly, changing your perception about where you are in the universe to some extent, that mindfulness. I have always been a salesperson. My whole life I've been, selling, and cannabis was an absolute no-brainer. So I literally, looked at the industry like I look at healthcare at the time. Colorado was the most regulated industry. They had come on board by 2008, and I cold called all the top players in Colorado, and I ended up partnering with the Green Solution. Young men who were just, blood, sweat, and tears built that business. And I came on board as the only non-family member. I built with the Green Solution, but oversaw building the first vertically integrated national franchise in the country. And we got it registered in almost all 50 states. California, believe it or not, was the one that opted out. But that was, my initiation into cannabis. And you learn very quickly, if you come out of healthcare, my world was about regulation and about, filling out RFPs and compliance and documentation. So I fit very easily into the cannabis space and adapted to that. And my background is owning restaurants and chains of retail stores. So from an operational standpoint, particularly dispensaries, that was a very natural space for me to land. So building dispensaries and branding and naming them and creating an experience-driven space for customers to learn about cannabis, purchase cannabis, and kind of dig into this brand new experience was, I could not look away, literally. There was, nothing better. So that's kind of my journey, how I got in it so long. Unfortunately, I will tell you, I was not smoking pot in high school. I started popping out kids way too early, so I didn't get to do any drugs then. Now I'm doing all the drugs, and I love it. But none of my kids live with me anymore. I'm a grandma, so now
Yeah.
is the time for me to get to do my drugs.
Yeah, what better time than now?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, cool. How did you get into, like you said, like what was getting into the Illinois cannabis industry like? Because that's
Well,
interesting.
it was, you know, early days, it was, you know, community meeting after community meeting. So the first part of the race was to secure a lease back in the, you know, the first round of the medical licenses. We had to have either buy the building or have a lease. We had to get the community on board. We had to apply with zoning and tax. So, you know, the first multiple months of that journey for me was navigating communities. I raised my kids in Western Springs, LaGrange. They were a hard no, and you just fan out and figure out, you know, where you can go. I grew up. I'm the oldest of 10 kids, and I grew up in Belleville, Illinois, which is 5 minutes, a stone's throw from St. Louis, Missouri. And my best friend growing up was the daughter of the mayor of Sauget, Illinois. So I put my first dispensary in Sauget, Illinois. It was big, and we built it on the back of understanding that adult use was coming. Of course, when you position anything on to captivate the attention of another state, when that state goes legal, and in the case of Illinois and Missouri, Missouri has always been the place where if you live on the border in Illinois, you go get your gas, your alcohol, your cigarettes, and your drugs in Missouri because they are back to speaking about the issue of tax. Missouri is very different than Illinois in how they approach excise tax. So that very difference, you know, can be very crippling. So that was my journey in. I put one in my hometown. I put one, you know, over by ISU in Normal, Illinois. Those multiplied to 4, and that was really my start in the industry. You know, back in the day, I was having lunches with Lou Lang. I mean, it was a different world back then. Everything we did, you know, a decade ago was very different than the race. I subsequently won additional licenses in Illinois, but it was so different, Cole. I mean, we had the highest dispensary scores in the state for the application that we wrote for the first round of dispensaries that we did. The second one, it was a luck of the draw. You know, it was a lottery essentially. So no matter how much we knew about building dispensaries, all of those applications, all of those RFPs were essentially the same. I mean, you check the box and then you know, kind of fingers crossed that you were going to break through the system. We did, fortunately, but there you have it. That's how I
Yeah.
got in, and I have not looked back. It's been a blast.
Yeah.
I have loved every minute of it.
Was that hard? Because like a lot of people credit Illinois as like creating generation 2 of cannabis. Like, was that?
I would argue Illinois created generation 1 of cannabis. I mean, everything
Oh,
was so fledgling. Like when I was going to MJ Biz back in 2013, 2014, it was at the Rio. I mean, you could throw a stone and hit almost everybody in the room. It was a bunch of young 30-year-old men. I was like a old lady grandma even then showing up to those things. I mean, fast forward, it's at the convention center in Las Vegas. You know what I mean? So um, my experience in the industry is a little different. I would argue that the first wave originated in Illinois. I mean, that's where all of our multi-state operators were born. Purely, PharmaCann, GTI, we were all born, you know, sitting in that space. You know, TGS became Columbia Care. I mean, all of those guys were the ones that really set the stage for how the cannabis industry was going to work. That also understanding that, of course, you know, why do I look to Colorado as the first? Because California, Oregon, they had been rolling in cannabis for some time, but Colorado was the first to seriously regulate, and then Illinois took those set of rules and really cemented them and created a monopoly whereby you could create these multi-state operators and allow them to flourish, and that is what we did. So I would argue Illinois started the true industry as we see it today.
yeah. How do you see that changing? Like, or do you see it changing? I know one of the things you mentioned to me that I wrote down,
Wow.
excuse me, the joint is hitting me back. Um, you said it's not easy to start a hemp or cannabis business, Cole. It's not a cheap venture. And this is kind of what we've been talking about. It's,
Right,
it's
right.
people question whether or not it's profitable. But one of the things that I really like you said is people who think they can just slap a label on and it will work out are in for a rude awakening. So like with that in mind,
Absolutely.
and with
I
the
think,
whole hemp dynamic in mind, what do you think the future looks like?
yeah, it certainly doesn't look like that little weird heyday we had in 2016 up until 2019. We're literally, as you just said, companies had to do nothing more than slap a label on and sort of, sort of, hope for the big exit. I always understood that was short lived. I don't think any brand really gets its teeth and its longevity without being authentic. When I built Oh Yes, the products were, like I said, were super important to me, but I immediately invested money in building, the tech stack, building the Oh Yes quiz, making sure that we were adding value to the customer's experience at every single hands turn, because the product enough isn't enough. Where do I see the industry going? I do think that the cannabis will be rescheduled. I think it'll be used for the election, and we are going to see some major changes with that. Right now, we are all just so fried. Anyone who's been in this industry, for the last 5 years is so burnt out. It's hard to romanticize it anymore. So we're just sitting here, with the aftershocks. But with rescheduling, like I said, we're going to see a relaxed, some relaxed regulatory stuff around banking. That's big. We're going to see institutional investors, and we're going to see, I believe, players who are not sharp operators weeded out. Now, in any industry, I would argue the cream rises to the top, and those stable companies that provide a good, authentic product and service to customers and follow through should be standing, and that those companies that are fly by night and thinking they can slap a label on a bottle and pull this off aren't going to make it. But when we weed that out, I think we're going to see the industry balancing out to some extent. And I hope, for my own sake, that we get some degree of reprieve relative to not only taxation and 280E, which will come with rescheduling, but with some of the regulatory oversight that has absolutely crippled us at every hand's turn. All, certainly in the dispensary retail sector, but when you manufacture products, you certainly get hit, and in cultivation. So I think those changes will really give a nice boost to sharp operators, and I think we'll see this industry flourish. I hope in the way that Silicon Valley had their second bubble and just killed it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it'll be interesting. Like you say, I never really, yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. I almost wonder what I wondered honestly, because like rescheduling and like you do see big companies, some of them that you mentioned. Like I mean, I had like Charlie Bachtell on the podcast recently, and I was watching like a safe banking, and I could like see him in the
Yeah.
background. I was like, oh, that's Charlie. So like they're
Yeah.
all those people are in Washington. So what I was wondering if like rescheduling might look like is kind of like in Illinois, where it's like this limited license except national thing. You know what I mean? But I didn't know.
Yeah. Rescheduling, the biggest advantage to retailers with rescheduling is that we are going to see an immediate reprieve to 280E, which
Right.
is a tax code that takes our 25% profits and sends it to the federal government. That alone is going to provide some breathing room for cash strapped and just hemorrhaging companies. The bigger players, if you look at some of the tax rebates that some of these bigger players are getting, Trulieve, I think I read an article recently, we're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars back in the coffers to reinvest in innovations, going abroad. I mean, I sat with Curaleaf, and I know their interest has moved from the US to Europe. for reasons that we can all accept, which is if I can't, show my investors some degree of profitability here, we're going to have to start, sowing our oats elsewhere, and we are going to see that. So my hope, because I am a mom and pop, is that the mom and pops and sharp operators can remain solvent, back to that word, in what will be this new climate for cannabis. I don't really know the answer to that. The big boys, I think, the ones that are stable and strong, they're going to get stronger, not weaker. And the ones that have overreached in terms of debt and financing and big reaches that they could never have hit, will not make it. But again, we're going to weed out the strong from the weak, and we are going to get to rebuild. And I hope mom and pops and social equity and those of us who are coming at it from a less financially stable place can play in this business. That is my dream.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And I'm curious, this is kind of a separate note, and then we can maybe wrap here soon.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see, and I mean, I guess you kind of even do this. I know you don't sell the THC hemp products, but I recently put this together for my fans because I thought it was interesting. You can see these are brands you can find in the dispensary that now also sell their products as hemp. You actually mentioned Curaleaf; they're in it now,
Sure,
and
Curaleaf, Wana,
um,
of course.
yeah, Incredibles I recently saw
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
Um,
Well, the
and
beverage industry, Cole, is absurd. And I think while we talk about that, I think we should break it into three categories. Certainly, the minor cannabinoids, CBD, CBG, CBN, are our go-tos. Those with some regulatory oversight. I mean, running a hemp business is not easy. I do it. So the regulatory hurdles from that standpoint are absolutely real. And then, of course, we have the highly regulated THC infused cannabis industry. And then we've got this little sneaker sitting right in the middle with Delta 8 and Delta 9. Now, that's a place I absolutely will not play in. I believe that is going to go away. I think it's very risky to drop, $100,000 on a line, on even if it's a small MOQs on a SKU, on a synthetic ingredient, Delta 8 or Delta 9, that is showing up in the convenience store next door to our high schools and getting young kids high without regulation. I think that is short lived. And I hope that the bigger players are not indulging in that little short windfall of revenue that can come. But that's another category that we always should discuss. And the people that you put up on the screen, I don't think are playing in that Delta 8, Delta 9 space. And I know in Illinois, we're really pushing to get that off the convenience store shelves. But that's a sleeper. That's a tricky one right there, because now we've got something that is unregulated that can get you high and is circumventing all of our tax, all of our regulatory requirements that we are burdened with on the THC side, and still have to navigate on the CBD side.
yeah, I'll just say, yeah, though the Incredibles, I bought those from
Yeah,
my
are they
local
awesome?
smoke store. Yeah, they're actually very, like, I will eat one of them, and like they've got a lot of Delta 8 in them. So they've got
Yeah,
Delta 8, there were a few other cannabinoids. I've got the package in the other room, but I just bought it because I was so
you're
surprised to
just
see.
curious, right?
Well, yeah, and I went to the smoke shop just to get some papers, and then I saw a brand that I recognized from the dispensary. And so I kind of wondered, I noticed that you didn't go into, like you say, you kind of put
Delta 8, Delta 9. Yeah, no.
Delta 9.
I'll
But I
tell
was
you, Cole,
wondering,
I
like, when you
did.
see bigger
Yeah.
brands, do you like start to wonder, you're like, like, do you start
Well,
to feel less?
it's a quick money grab. It's very, Florida just, kicked it out. So, I mean, they've got the capital to kind of push through those markets and pull out quickly. And again, let's say you're running 100,000 chocolate bars and Illinois turns around and says, this is a no-fly zone. We're not going to allow this. You are, sitting on those products. Now, I did feed our bees Delta 8, and it got that raw honey gets you super high. Now, we never let that out into the market, but just as an innovation and an exploration, we understood what was happening by doing that. It's not a space I'm willing to play in. I know some of the bigger companies are doing it. I believe it's short-lived. I think it's destructive to the over. If we're looking at the three buckets, and we've got CBD and CBG and CBN fighting their way for space and getting kicked out of Walgreens and Target, kind of Whole Foods, managing that space. And yet we've got these convenience stores selling it wholesale to our kids. And then we're taxed at a plus 25% with 280E with THC. That is definitely a recipe for disaster, right? So I get why they're doing it. It's the margins are very, very tight on the THC side. Oh yes, doesn't make money going into the Illinois market with THC. All that money goes back into marketing. That is, there are not high margins there. But I do think the experience is worthwhile. Now, whether using Delta 8 in an unregulated chocolate bar bought at a convenience store with our kids is the right move, my take is no, I don't like it.
Right.
So I
Do you
would definitely push the other direction.
do you think if they were just subjected to the same like regulations, then that would be acceptable, like
Well,
age
Cole, if we do
requirement?
that, so absolutely. So to your point, if we take Delta 8 and Delta 9 and we apply 280E on it, we force it into the dispensaries, right, into that regulatory environment, then it's going to compete with, with THC. And that's a much harder competition than competing with CBD
Mm.
in an unregulated market. So there's a couple of paths that we can take with cannabis, all of them valuable. We have a medicinal path, and there's places for CBD and CBN and CBD, all of those things absolutely in the medicinal space. And then we have the space where you and I want to relax on the weekend. We don't want a glass of wine or a margarita, and we want to smoke a joint or we want to take an edible. And that's the place we can go. And that's about getting high. And that is okay too, because people, for as long as we can think back, have looked to getting high. But slipping in an unregulated synthetic product that is not going through the rigors of lab testing and everything else that we place on THC, that's an unfair advantage, and we are going to get ourselves in trouble, and we're going to see bad things creeping up in that non-lab tested products that are going to go after our kids, and that I'm against.
Well, selfish plug, I had to hold myself back earlier when we were talking about sex. Folks, if you've made it this far, I actually have a series focused on sex work. If you go to
Yeah.
colememo.com/sex, you can check it out. Also, earlier when I displayed that document, if you were curious, you're like, oh, that seems like history that I would want to learn more about. If you go to colememo.com/history, I have started a Illinois cannabis history project where we kind of go through and talk about, how the cannabis system came to be. But my most exciting project that I recently released, which actually is how I met the person that connected you and I, was
Yes.
a project called, well, the protest was called Hash Wednesday. And so if you go to colememo.com/history, you can check out our archive on Hash Wednesday. And it was a protest that started in Illinois. It seems like as early as 1977 on the University of Illinois quad. It was modeled
Interesting.
after other hash bashes, and it basically involved people just openly smoking cannabis on the University of Illinois campus. And like I said, I, have a
Oh,
whole
interesting.
newspaper
Oh,
archive. Here are students getting arrested in Illinois for smoking
look at
weed.
that.
They just did it openly. Here's weed growing in Illinois back in the day. It's wild
Wow. I
hemp.
mean, if this is 88, Cole, we are in the thick of just say no to drugs here. I mean, we're out of Nixon, we're out of Reagan, but these are not comfortable times. I grew up here. I mean, this is when
Yeah.
I was a couple years out of high school at this point, but
Are you familiar
we
with the
weren't.
name Debbie Goldsberry?
No, I don't.
No? Okay.
Probably I am. It could be my short-term memory
Yeah,
loss.
it's all
Long
good.
term.
Same here. But I ended up
Yeah.
interviewing her. I guess a lot
Oh,
of
you
people knew
did?
her name. This is her as a kid.
Oh, wow. Look at
And I
that.
also interviewed this kid here. He's an adult now, of course, but
Yeah, of course. He
but
looks like he's my age now.
yeah, I was gonna show you the person that connected us. Um, I thought I had a
Is this
picture of
Tony?
Tony. Yeah, I
Oh,
was looking for my
wow. So
picture of me and Tony, but
he
yeah.
got his picture in the paper. I love that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
there he
So
is. I
there
see
he
it.
is, picture in the
Nice.
paper.
Brilliant. Oh, I saw him in the other picture too.
Yep. And then
All
here's,
right,
yeah,
Tony, you held up okay. Nice.
here's Tony and I. So
That looks great. That is
yeah.
awesome.
But just had to give a plug for, our history. And I also just wanted to that was my way of giving Tony a shout out. And I guess I should also just
Yes.
show this quick picture just because it's funny. He sent me this picture. Apparently, these are some of his friends. It's on the quad
Oh, look
and
at
they're
that.
hitting a bong. And it took me a while to realize this, but they're standing on another kid's shoulders. That's not a ladder.
Oh, wow. That's I wonder how effective that bond was, really. I mean,
Yeah.
that looks like it's 10 feet of piping. More,
Right.
you
Right.
know?
Yeah. I had
That's
to wonder the
funny.
same. But
Yeah.
it's been a pleasure speaking with you
Yeah.
today, and I doubt it'll be the last time we talk, especially since you're getting into the Illinois cannabis industry, and it sounds like, you have many more plans,
Yeah.
and of course the
Well, we
future.
plan to be at Pride. Come down to Pride. We are. I renovated a 1969 Airstream, like a 20-footer. So we'll show up at Pride. We'll be giving away, maybe some condoms, some matches, some fun, and just digging into some sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
That sounds so fun. Yeah,
June
maybe we'll see you
22nd
out
and
there.
23rd. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Thank you for giving that shout out. So folks, maybe we'll see you there.
You will
Um,
see me there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope you found value, everybody, in this conversation. And before we go, Tanya, did you have any last words or do we cover it?
Um, Please, y'all have a bunch of sex. Go take the sex quiz. Have a great weekend and support your local dispensaries.
Yeah. If you want to
Yeah.
take that sex quiz, the links once again will be in the podcast description. Tanya,
Nice.
thank you for your time today. And
Thank you, Cole.
again, I look forward to the next time we can chat.
Yeah,
So.
likewise. Thank you so much.